Hello and welcome to LarpWright. Today I'm going to show you how to make an oilskin ground cover such as this that will keep your sleeping arrangement from getting wet and will double up as an emergency tarp in a pinch, keeping you dry from below and above. And I'll also show you how to use it to set up a bedroll like this one that you can transport easily and set up quickly. So, if this is something that interests you, like and subscribe, and I'll show you exactly how to make and how to use this.
To make the ground cover and later the tarp, I've gotten this awning cloth. This is a cotton cloth. It is non-see-through and non-flexible. And while I would usually get the heaviest cloth I could find, I went the other way around. This time I've got the lightest awning cloth I could find, because I'm worried that big pieces of cloth like this ground cover or the tarp more so will become very heavy, and that will be detrimental to backpacking. So this is the lightest I could find, and it is still 300 grams per square meter, 300 GSM. The running width of this is 1 meter and 60, which is a bit more than I need, but I don't mind. And I'm measuring piece by piece a length of 2 meter and 20, which is the length I prefer for my blankets, because I'm a big guy. So this will be long enough that neither my head or my legs will stick out of the ground cover. Actually giving it a little bit more, like 224. So I have a bit of material left to hem in the edges. Doing this, found out that the table I'm cutting on is exactly 1 meter in depth. So I can just use the table itself as a measuring stick when cutting meter long and multiple of meter long material. And this is the only cut and the only piece we need to make the ground cover. From that perspective, it's very easy to make. Before I go to the sewing machine, I set up mixture, my oilskin mixture. I'm using, to start with, the leftover blends from my experimenting to get oilskin. So it's a mixture of linseed oil, beeswax and isopropanol alcohol, but I found out you don't actually need the isopropanol alcohol. Both the linseed oil and the beeswax will give it water repelling properties. The beeswax more so than the linseed oil. The more beeswax you have in your mixture, the more water repelling your oilskin will be, and the less flexible. And the more linseed oil you have, the more flexible the final product will become. A 50-50 mixture is actually not a bad place to start, and would do well for something like a dry bag, which I made of 100% beeswax, so it was very inflexible, but very watertight. And if you go to something that is really big, where you don't want to bother with a heat gun, then get rid of the wax altogether. Just use linseed oil and maybe mix in a little bit of isopropanol alcohol to thin it down. As I said, for this I'm using the leftovers, which is a mixture of about 50% beeswax, 50% linseed oil, good place to start, and there's some isopropanol alcohol in here, which you don't really need. Once that runs out, I will go for a mixture of about 1 part beeswax to 4 parts linseed oil, which is flexible, very flexible, and still pretty watertight, and should do well for a ground cover like this. And the sewing machine. All I'm doing here is hemming in the cut edges of the fabric. The edges along the long sides are woven in a way that they won't unravel, but the edges on the cut side you need to hem in. And to do that, I fold them over not once, but twice. This should keep it from unraveling and also makes the edge stronger, because there are more layers of material we would have to tear through. You could actually get away with not hemming in the edges at all. After this has been treated with the oil wax mixture, that will keep it from unraveling also, but it won't look as clean as this one will, because I'm hemming in the edges. Sometimes you see in movies this really roughly cut cloth with frayed edges. While that might be an interesting look, I prefer my stuff to look clean. I think real medieval people would have spent the extra time of hemming in the edges, because it already took so long to make the yarn by hand and then weave the fabric by hand. Would have taken so long that the bit of extra time you spend for hemming in all of your edges so it doesn't unravel and looks clean would be minuscule in comparison to the rest of the work that already went into the piece. So I'm folding over twice and hemming in all of the cut edges. To sew this, I'm using just a regular sewing machine with a beefy needle, something like a leather needle or a jeans needle should do fine. This is not so thick that you would need a leather sewing machine or anything of that kind. I'm also using a beefy, thick polyester yarn that could be used to sew leather, because I want this to be tough, and because I happen to have a huge spool you can see at the back of the machine, so I won't run out anytime soon. Just using a simple wide linear stitch, and at the end of the stitch I will go, at the beginning and the end of the stitch, I will go back and forth a bit to secure the stitches. If you want this whole piece to be biodegradable, to be compostable, then you should use cotton yarn. Then neither the linseed oil, nor the beeswax, nor the cotton fabric, nor your yarn will be anything that is not biodegradable. But I happen to have so much of this polyester yarn, and I don't plan on composting my ground cover anytime soon, so polyester yarn it is. with everything soon, which is just hemming in the two edges really. There's not a lot of cutting and sewing in this project. I cover most of my work table here with these disposable dirty plates, because what is going to happen now is a really dirty process and I don't want to mess up my table beyond cleaning it up. Ideally, you want to do this outside actually, not in a closed room. If you are doing it in a closed room, at least open the windows so you've got a good amount of airflow. I've got my tools, a white brush, hot air gun, and these trusty rubber gloves that are super dirty, and I've been using this same pair since I started out doing LARP equipment of any kind, so surprisingly sturdy. And by now the oilskin mixture I have here is boiling. And now the process is fairly simple in and of itself. You brush the mixture onto the fabric and then you use the hot air gun to heat it up so it soaks into the fabric, and you spread it out and you try to do it as evenly as possible. You will see me try out a few different methods of applying this, some with the pen in the hand, some with the air gun in the hand. But really, it's all a bit awkward. But that is the price you are paying for the extra water resistance you get from the wax in the mixture. If you've got only linseed oil in the mixture, only linseed oil and isopropanol to thin it down, you can just dump the whole thing in a bucket of this stuff, soak it, then wring it out and hang it up to dry, and you are done. But I wanted to have this extra water resistance so I won't soak through any moisture that is in the ground I'm laying on. Yeah, from here I'm going into time-lapse. Yeah, time-lapse it is! And after going over the whole piece once, I turn it around and go over it again so I can catch any places where I don't have enough mixture to get a really good and even coverage. And in the very end, I put the leftover mixture into a container and seal it with a made on the spot piece of oil paper. Now all that is left to do to finish the tarp is to let it dry. I hang it up in my basement, but ideally you want to hang it up outside, so when it's dry and warm, hang it up outside. If not, use your basement and air it well to deal with the smell. This has to dry for a few days. I let this one dry for a whole week. You'll know when it is about dry to the touch and it's almost not smelling anymore, then it is good, finished. To make the blanket roll, I want to have a set of leather straps. And since I'm all out of buckles, I'm scavenging here from this blanket. This is the same blanket from my How to Make a Blanket Roll backpack, but I'm not using it in that function anymore, just as a regular blanket. So these straps no longer serve the purpose. Also, one of them broke, so I'm using a tool here called a stitching separator or seam separator. Nahttrenner is what it's called in German anyway. To undo the stitches, holding this to the blanket, in this case holding this together, and then I'm fashioning a new strap, sewing it on with my sewing awl for the broken leather belt. To pack a bedroll with this, first spread out the oilskin on the ground. If you can, on a dry and almost clean spot, which I didn't have available because it's February. And on that goes a number of blankets depending on what the temperature is. You might even want to include something like a sheepskin or reindeer skin or a modern camping mattress to keep yourself insulated from the ground. For this setup, I'm using 2 wool blankets. One I will use to insulate me from the ground, the other I will use to cover myself with. I have seen some pre-made ground covers or cowboys blankets that had 1 wool blanket already sewn into them, but I find having these as separate items gives you more flexibility in how you want to set this up. And once this is nice and tidy in the middle, you fold over both sides of the ground cover and let it overlap a little bit in the middle. Then it's time to roll this up. Hold up tightly, make sure there's not too much dirt going into there. And this will keep rain from reaching the blankets when you're on the trail. Make sure that the ends of the blankets are covered up as well. Maybe fold them in a bit. I'm folding the whole end piece over here so there's no opening left. And then secure it with a piece of rope or with some leather straps. Packed together like this, it's fairly compact and secure from the elements, so good to transport. But depending on the size of your tarp and the number of blankets or skins you put in there, or furs you put in there, this is quite heavy. So you might want to make a smaller tarp or forgo some of the furs and blankets for some modern camping equipment which might not look as ambientic as this one, but is much lighter while serving the same function. With the work we already put in, setting this up becomes super easy and fast. First, undo the straps. Second, you roll it out again. And third, you unfold it. Now, ideally, you want some insulation from the ground when setting this up. That could be something like dry leaves, spruce twigs, straw, hay, a modern camping mat, something that will keep the cold of the ground, or rather your body heat, going into the ground. Now, to use this, you don't want to wear your boots while sleeping. You want to have your blood circulation to your feet as unhindered as possible, so you might even want to take off your socks. And one of the ways to use it is just use one blanket as ground cover and the other to cover yourself. If it's a bit colder outside, one thing you can do is to spread out your blanket underneath you like a kite, and then fold both sides over your body, so you've got 2 layers of blanket with air trapped between these layers covering your body. As you can see, I'm a big guy and even my big blanket is a bit small for this job. Or, especially if you manage to pack some dry leaves or spruce twigs under your ground cover, you can use both blankets to roll yourself up in. And ground cover as well in this case. This is why I have blankets that are 1.50 m or even wider, because I'm a big guy and otherwise I don't fit in here. And if you don't have a tarp and it's raining in a pinch, this tarp is big enough to also fold this over and shield yourself from the rain. Not the most comfortable setup to sleep under, but in an emergency this will work and keep you dry. Now, all that is left to do is have a good night's sleep and film the intro. Thanks for watching and goodbye.